Many charter, commuter and regional pilots feel they cannot get adequate representation from established pilot unions, which are politically dominated by major carriers. The Regional Airline Pilot Association was formed for the specific purpose of focusing attention on regional and commuter airline transportation and the working conditions of that industry's flight crews. In the fall of 1988, the Board of Directors of RAPA began a campaign to educate the public regarding the dangerously long duty days that federal aviation regulations allow regional pilots to work. RAPA believed that if information about the outrageously long days for flight crews was made public, the traveling public would force Congress to compel the Federal Aviation Administration to establish limits on the time a pilot can be kept on duty. In the spring of 1990, as a result of the RAPA educational program, newspapers all over the United States reprinted an article written by David Dietz of the San Francisco Chronicle. Dietz exposed the dangerous pilot fatigue which is permitted by current FAA rules. RAPA's Vice President, Chester Gault, was fired for his contribution to that article. It took 1.5 years to get Captain Gault's job back, but RAPA did it.
Is that some of those commuter pilots say they are too tired to fly. Tonight, Wendy has a special report on this disturbing problem.
Commuter pilots say they actually have a much harder job than the pilots.
Consumer editor Paula Lyons is joining us this morning with a look at those airlines and, of course, the issue of safety. Paula, good morning.
Good morning, Charlie.
The RAPA campaign has resulted in a long list of newspaper and magazine articles on fatigue and several local and national television broadcasts.
But is your pilot safe and sound asleep?
In the summer of 1990, the Airline Pilots Association submitted a petition for rulemaking to the FAA, which began to deal with the pilot duty time problem. While it supported the ALPA position regarding changes in the rule which applies to major carrier pilots, RAPA thought ALPA had not gone far enough in its proposals regarding changes required in the regional and commuter rules. Using ALPA's position as a basic pattern, RAPA proposed changes in the regional rules which provide much greater safety for passengers in charter, commuter, and regional airplanes. In March of 1992, as an important step in this process, congressional hearings on the subject were convened by the Aviation Subcommittee of the United States House of Representatives.
The United States spends millions of dollars to protect airline passengers from the real but rare threat of air piracy, and spends a fortune to preclude the marginal possibility that a flight crew may be impaired by drugs. In this cautious context, it is remarkable that the federal aviation regulations themselves permit circumstances which result each and every day in thousands of passengers being subjected to flights conducted by exhausted flight crews.
Do you think that the current regulations, as you stated orally and as you state here in your testimony in writing, are adequate and do not need change?
I do.
Okay.
Do you think that there ought to be some tightening of those regulations on duty time limitations as it relates to commuter pilots?
Yes, sir, I do. Most carriers exceed the minimum standards that are set forth in the FARs, and the reduced rest requirements for commuters under 135 as opposed to 121 were originally intended to give commuter operators greater scheduling flexibility. There is some indication, however, that the reduced requirements have in some cases resulted in scheduling abuses, and this one, at least having reviewed it very briefly, might fall into that category.
Frankly, we have looked at the accident statistics. We are very satisfied with the current rules. We see no evidence that the current rules are a danger to safety. If we did see that, we would encourage the FAA to make changes.
What is the longest duty day a commuter pilot can work under FAA rules?
Let me ask Dave Harrington to take it. Longest duty day that a pilot can work.
It's the rules aren't based on duty time, so you have to take the flight time requirements, and there's some look-back provisions. I believe that a strict interpretation of the commuter rules would leave you with a 16-hour duty day maximum in most cases for commuter and the domestic side of 121 operations.
There seemed to be some confusion on the part of Federal Aviation Administration and industry representatives about what the regulation regarding flight time limitation actually says, and if this group will accept the Assistant General Counsel of the Federal Aviation Administration as an authority on this subject. He makes it clear that there is no limit. There is no limit to the amount of time that a flight crew may be on duty if they are delayed in the course of their scheduled rounds by an unforeseen weather or mechanical delay. There is no limit.
Do you work 96-hour weeks? Regularly?
Airline pilots don't work 96-hour weeks regularly either, Congressman.
Okay, so you wouldn't object to us then setting out some rule that would say you can't have that many hours?
I would very much object to a rule that would set a maximum duty hour day.
I'm certain that your constituents assume that the FAA requires one level of safety for all scheduled passenger operations. But unfortunately, there's actually two levels of safety for scheduled operations. The decline in the level of safety when a passenger transfers from a large air carrier to a regional carrier is masked by using flight and airline names that infer that the connecting flight is being operated by the major carrier. Unfortunately, the safety level established by Part 123 and Part 135 of the Federal Air Regulations that govern certification of commuter aircraft and operations of regional airlines is less than that established for the major airlines under Parts 25 and under Part 121. It should also be pointed out that the original intent for Part 135 was on-demand air taxi operations, not scheduled passenger operations.
The commuter activity is typically on shorter hauls, requires more takeoff and landings, which is obviously the most stressful part of the flight. They're flying into airports whose aids to navigation might not be what they are at a major airport. They're flying planes that perhaps in all cases don't have the sophisticated avionics that you'd find aboard a 121 carrier. They're flying typically at lower altitudes where, particularly during the summer months, you might encounter more severe, and winter months, more severe weather. And that there's no question, just given the experience level of the typical pilot in the commuter aviation industry, that he or she in general will probably be a less experienced pilot. Certainly not an unqualified pilot, but perhaps a less experienced pilot. So I would say that in general, I would have to agree with your statement that it might be, by virtue of the definition of a commuter carrier, a more stressful environment.
Commuter pilots have said that, and I elaborated on this earlier with the NTSB, that piloting commuter aircraft is more demanding, more fatiguing, than on larger transport aircraft, where you're in the air longer hours, making fewer takeoffs and landings, and that therefore there ought to be more rest for commuter pilots than for their brothers and sisters in the larger aircraft. What's your view on that subject?
Well, I understand the argument, and in some ways, as you and other members have said, it has a good common sense ring to it. Perhaps.
Have you gone on board a commuter aircraft and taken a few days with a pilot and the number of operations that they have to perform every day?
No, I haven't done that. It's perhaps an experience that I'd find worthwhile.
Not to be cherished, but one to be undertaken.
That's right.
I find it strange that we're, can't schedule a dispatcher for more than 10 hours, but we can schedule flight crews for more than 10 hours.
It certainly is in contrast to the flight and duty time for pilots.
Right. Well, at some point we apparently determined that dispatchers would get so fatigued after 10 hours that we couldn't have them working, but somehow we can have our pilots and co-pilots and flight crews on duty for extraordinary periods of time. And
Consider, what is the consensus of your industry on the hours continuously in service for a pilot?
This is always a little bit of a confusing subject because many people just don't understand the flight and duty time rules. You know, as we say over and over again, the rules are not set up to establish a maximum time of duty. What they're set up is to make sure that at the end of every 24-hour, at the end of a schedule, a pilot can look back and see that in that 24-hour period he had 8 hours of rest. Now,
we require the same for truckers.
It makes no sense to have pilots operating a piece of equipment that's extremely noisy, going really fast, has a lot of technical qualities about it that make it demanding, and there is no requirement anywhere in there that they be given even a half an hour to have a sandwich and a bowl of soup. I can show you schedules in this stack of papers that will demonstrate that flight crews are going all day long, 12 and 13 hours, and they never at any point during the day have an opportunity even to have a sandwich. I don't think that that's reasonable. We know enough about human fatigue to know that if a person doesn't have a decent diet, that accentuates the problems of fatigue.